Nuclear weapons offer us nothing but a balance of terror, and a balance of terror is still terror. George Wald. Nuclear weapons violate morality. As weapons of war, it must be evaluated on its ability to follow the rules of war known as just war theory. Just war theory is important because it tries to minimize the injustice of war, reduces the impact on civilians, and seeks to mitigate senseless war. Just war theory can only be applied when both sides see their enemy as humans just like them, which creates more morality overall. Alexander Mosley, philosophy professor, explains, quote, "It is only when the enemy is seen to be a people, sharing a moral identity with whom one can do business in the following peace, and tacit or explicit rules are formed for how wars should be fought and who they should involve and what kinds of relationships should apply to the aftermath of war." And continues, "The principles of just war are commonly held to be having just cause, being a last resort, being declared by the proper authority, possessing right intention, having a reasonable chance of success, and the end being proportional to the means used." Following the cessation of war, three possibilities emerge. Either the army has been defeated, has been victorious, or has agreed to a ceasefire. Just war theory also acts to remind contenders that war is a last resort and that its essential aim is always peace. So if peace is forthcoming in any guise, it is morally critical for all parties to seek a term to a permanent peace rather than a momentary lapse of war. End quote. First, I'll present an overview of why nuclear weapons violate just war theory per their mere existence. Nuclear deterrence is a violation of just war theory. Deterrence is in direct conflict with just war theory and increases the chances of war which would be unjust. For instance, the fact that the concept of nuclear arsenals is often protected by fear-mongering officials whose career rides on the continuation of public fear. Mosley explains that this type of perpetuating attitude is against just war theory. Quote, "A preemptive strike of policy is a ploy of a tyrannical or bullying power that policy of preemptive slips easily into mechanizations of false flag operations, in which the pretext for war is created by contrived dressing one's own soldiers up in the enemy's uniforms," unquote. This deterrence, according to many theorists such as Ellsberg 2017, who points out that deterrence in itself is the direct threat of nuclear war, which is a violation of just war theory, and that there is no seeking after ultimate peace, quote, "Each side prepares and actually intends to attack the other side's military nervous system," end quote. Kulchin 2015 picks it up, quote, "The efficiency of deterrence has been grossly overestimated. There is little hard evidence that it has worked in the past, and certainly less that it will continue to work in the future. These are reasons to think that it has increased the danger of nuclear conflict by aggravating tensions and pushing technological development of the weapons and methods of delivery," end quote. And it's not just what nuclear weapons can do, it's what their proliferation signifies. The purpose of nuclear weapons is to kill civilians. Nuclear weapons are not generally weapons which kill discriminately. That is their entire appeal. Mass killing of cities of civilians is the essence of the nuclear attraction. Mosley tells us, quote, "In joining an army, the individual is said to renounce his or her rights not to be targeted in war. The bearing of arms takes a person into an alternative moral realm in which killing is the expectation and possible norm. It is the world removed from civilian structures. Intrinsicists, on the other hand, can argue that certain spheres of life ought never be targeted for war. For example, hospitals and densely populated suburbs, consideration of women and children, or the treatment of prisoners. In waging war, it's considered unfair and unjust to attack indiscriminately, since non-combatants or innocents are deemed to stand outside the field of war proper. Immunity from war can be reasoned from the fact that their existence and activity is not part of the essence of war, which is the killing of combatants," end quote. Just war theory more clearly takes a stance against mass or indiscriminate killing. Mosley, quote, "When soldiers return their weapons against non-combatants or pursue their enemy beyond what is reasonable, they are no longer committing legitimate acts of war but acts of murder. Lack of identification does not give a government the right to kill indiscriminately. The onus is on the government to identify the combatants, and so the implication goes that if there is any uncertainty involving, then the attack must not be made," end quote. Nuclear weapons are a clear violation of just war theory. Many of the states who have used nuclear weapons so that they have harmed other people have gone largely unpunished, which is also against just war theory. Mosley once more, quote, "In the Nuremberg and Tokyo trials, no Allied generals or politicians were held accountable for the atrocities created by the bombing of civilian centers in Germany and Japan and the dropping of nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki," end quote. After looking at all this broad philosophical implication, there are also real-world impacts here in the United States my argument can point to. Nuclear weapons have been tested on indigenous peoples. Since the defeat of the indigenous peoples, the principles of just war have not been followed, as there are specific rules for how to treat a defeated enemy, still give them dignity, and act under proportionality. Mosley, quote, "When one's own army is victorious and the partiality of victory can be so easily dismissed on the enthusiastic wave that accompanies triumph. Victory is so often associated with the greater right when one's own country vanquishes its enemy, and assumedly with that right comes justification to impose conditions upon the vanquished. Victory is provided that winners with the means of exploiting the defeated nation and for claiming rights over its land and people, whether in the form of enslavement or in the monopolistic mercantile contracts. Sometimes an appeal to divine justice is made. At other times, the supremacy of one's nation, race, creed, or political order is lauded over the defeated. Economic exploitation is not the only means of subjugating the defeated. New political or religious frameworks can also be imposed, sometimes as a means of rehabilitating the defeated," unquote. The non-concessional annexation of land for nuclear weapons testing, the allowance of indigenous people to live on land, and sometimes even the intentional studies to watch those people decay, has allowed the concept of nuclear arsenals to violate just war theory in multiple ways. That being the not correct treatment of a defeated group, hurting civilians, and clearly not seeing certain people as humans. Cato 1993, quote, "Viewed as a whole, nuclear war, albeit undeclared, has been waged against the Fourth World and indigenous nations. The primary targets of warfare have been invariably the sovereign nations of Fourth World and indigenous peoples. Thus, history has already witnessed the nuclear wars against the Marshall Islands, French Polynesia, Australian Aborigines, and many more," end quote. Nuclear arsenals, their implication, and maneuvering of their states into war violates just war theory and therefore morality. And with that, I guess we should show the audience, and that's it.
Yay!
Yay!
Thank you.
Yay!